At 4 hours GMT, I'm Regin Ahmed, and coming up in this edition of the Newsroom, in Paris, a fatal knife attack. Prosecutors open a terror investigation as witnesses describe a chilling scene.
The attacker continued to walk quietly. His hands were covered in blood, and he had a knife in his left hand.
A triple bombing targeting churches in Indonesia's Surabaya city will be live in Jakarta. Iraq is counting the votes after its first election since victory was declared over the so-called Islamic State, but turnout has not been ideal.
The electoral process had a very low turnout. Most citizens didn't come out, and those who came to vote had errors on the voting paper.
And Israel takes the Eurovision gong.
I'm not your toy.
The night was full of surprises, including Britain interrupted by a stage invasion. We'll have all the latest on the Newsroom.
Hello, I'm Rosemary Crick with the BBC News. Suicide bombers have attacked 3 churches in Indonesia's second city, Surabaya. Police say at least 6 people have been killed and more than 30 others have been injured. Roger Walker has more details.
The attacks occurred within 10 minutes of one another as Christians gathered for Sunday services. An online video showed passers-by going to the aid of an injured person outside one church and a man lying beside a motorcycle. It's not known if he was a suicide bomber. TV pictures showed debris around the entrance of a church and police cordoning off areas as crowds gathered. Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim-majority country. No group has said it was behind the bombings, but militants have mounted a series of attacks on minorities in recent years.
A terrorism investigation has begun in France after a man armed with a knife lashed out at passers-by in central Paris. 1 person was killed and 4 were injured, 2 of them seriously. The attack happened in the busy Opera district. Witnesses say the knifeman shouted Allahu Akbar and police attempted to stop him with a stun gun before shooting him dead. This woman was in the area at the time.
The police arrived quickly. Everyone arrived quickly. We didn't know what was going on. We were quickly moved inside the bar. I went outside and I saw a man lying on the floor.
The French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe visited the scene of the attack and expressed sympathy for those killed and wounded. He praised the rapid response of the police and said France would not give in to terror.
Obviously, the Interior Minister and I are in contact with the President, and we want to state France's determination, our absolute determination, not to give ground in the face of the threat that these attackers seek to impose upon us.
The Islamic State group said on its news agency that it was behind the attack. President Trump has thanked North Korea after it announced that it would begin dismantling its nuclear test site in less than 2 weeks. In a tweet, he described Pyongyang's decision as a very smart and gracious gesture. North Korea had said in an earlier statement that foreign experts would be invited to watch the event. The latest statement mentions only journalists. Mr. Trump said the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and he are due to hold a summit in June. A luxury apartment block with links to the former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak has reported to have been raided by police in the capital Kuala Lumpur. An unnamed senior police officer told the Reuters news agency that officers were looking for sensitive documents the new government feared could be taken out of the country. The new Prime Minister, Mahathir Mohamad, has banned his defeated rival from leaving Malaysia. World News from the BBC. Israel says it will almost double the number of troops on its border with the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank to deal with any Palestinian protests about the opening of the American embassy in Jerusalem on Monday. The embassy's move from Tel Aviv coincides with the culmination of weeks of demonstrations against the creation of the Jewish state. Iraq's Electoral Commission says that fewer than half the country's voters took part in Saturday's parliamentary elections, the first since the government declared victory over the Islamic State group. Turnout was just over 44.5%. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi's political grouping is thought to be marginally ahead, but the outcome is far from certain. Many Iraqis are deeply disillusioned by widespread corruption and the dire state of the economy. China's first domestically built aircraft carrier has begun sea trials. State media said the ship left the port of Dalian for tests. China's only other carrier is a Soviet-era ship bought from Ukraine. Beijing is believed to want to build more as part of ambitious plans to develop its navy. A song inspired by the Me Too anti-harassment campaign has won the Eurovision Song Contest for Israel. But the event was overshadowed by a protester rushing onto the stage during a performance by the British entrant Suri. Her song finished third from bottom. David Silito has more from Lisbon.
The winner is Israel!
It was Israel's night with a convincing victory by Netta with her anthem of the Me Too movement toy. But for UK fans, the moment of the night was a recovery from near disaster. Suri, a 200-to-1 Eurovision outsider, was more than halfway through her song when a protester grabbed her microphone. Seconds later, the mic back. It was as if nothing had happened, but sadly, not enough to make an impact on the scoreboard.
BBC News.
You're listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Regid Ahmed. Well, we begin in Indonesia, where 3 churches have been attacked this morning. Officials say suicide bombers blew themselves up, the explosions happening within a short space of time. The BBC's Rebecca Henschke is in Jakarta for us. Rebecca, can you tell us what happened?
Well, the first attack was on the Catholic Church Santa Maria around 7:30 this morning. It was just after the first early morning mass there and before a second service was about to begin. So people were filing out and in. And then within 10 minutes, another 2 attacks took place at a Protestant church and a second church. So at the moment, the death toll is 8 people dead and nearly 40 injured, some of them seriously injured, and they're being treated in hospitals in Surabaya.
Do we know who's behind the attacks?
Nobody's claimed responsibility at the moment. Terrorist analysts believe it may be the group JAD, which is associated to the so-called Islamic State, but nobody has claimed responsibility, and the police are being very careful about that. It does come after a very active week for terrorist cells in Indonesia. Last week, there was a hostage and riot taking place inside a maximum security prison not far from where I am here in Jakarta, where terrorist inmates seized the police and their weapons and killed 5 of them. And they were broadcasting that live on social media, and there were flags showing support for the so-called Islamic State, although the police have also downplayed that, saying that riot was more about prison conditions. But just yesterday, 2 women were also arrested who the police say were planning an attack near that area.
All right, Rebecca, thank you very much for that update. Rebecca Henschke in Jakarta. France is dealing with yet another attack, this time on the streets of Paris. A man armed with a knife went after people in the Opera District, killing 1 person and injuring 4. This witness works in a restaurant nearby and described what he saw.
L'agresseur a continué à marcher tranquillement. Il marchait.
The attacker continued to walk quietly. His hands were covered in blood, and he had a knife in his left hand. He looked for the victims, and each time he moved forwards, we saw people moving away shouting. The police surrounded him right after, and he didn't stop. He tried to stab a policeman several times. That's when they shot him.
Well, French prosecutors have now opened a terrorism investigation, and the Islamic State group has said on its news agency that it was behind the attack. I got more details from David Chazan in Paris.
This attack took place right in the heart of Paris, near the Palais Garnier Opera House, in the second arrondissement of the French capital. This is an area with lots of cafes, restaurants, cinemas and theatres, and it was packed with people out for the evening when the attack happened shortly after 9 p.m.
And can you tell us more about what the prosecutor had to say about this particular attack?
The prosecutor said that it is suspected to have been a jihadist attack. He quoted witnesses as saying, several credible witnesses as he described them, saying that the attacker shouted Allahu Akbar, and police are describing the man as aged about 20, bearded, with long dark hair, So we don't know for a fact that this was a jihadist attack, but that is the suspicion. And so this case has been handed over to specialised anti-terrorist prosecutors.
Can you tell us more about what the witnesses have had to say?
One witness, a woman called Fiona Zanetti, said that she was in a restaurant when the attack happened, and she described how the assailant just seemed to be targeting people at random, rushing up to them and trying to stab them where they were standing or walking. And there were scenes of chaos as people started running. Now, several hours after the incident, a lot of people were still being kept inside the restaurants and the cafes where they were when the attack happened.
Now, France is understandably on high alert given the history of attacks in that country, and we've heard from the French president and others about this particular incident.
Yes, that's right. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has tweeted saying that he saluted the courage of the police who neutralised the attacker in the name of all French people. He said his thoughts were with the victims of the attack, those injured, and their families. And he also said that France is paying the price of blood once again, but is not yielding an inch to the enemies of freedom.
David Shazan. Votes are being counted in Iraq's first general election since the government declared victory over the Islamic State group. Fewer than half of Iraq's electorate exercised their right to vote in Saturday's parliamentary elections, and according to the country's electoral commission, the turnout was just over 44.5%. Samed Ismail is the manager of a polling station in Baghdad.
The electoral process had a very low turnout. Most citizens didn't come out, and those who came to vote had errors on the voting paper or with the prints, or their name existed at another station, and there wasn't a serious effort to educate citizens by the Electoral Commission.
The BBC's Yelda Hakim is in Baghdad and told us security was a major issue for the authorities.
Security has been tight across the country. Airports and borders have been closed, and the movement of vehicles from one province to the other has been limited. Here in Baghdad, there's been a curfew since last night. However flawed this country may be, this is now one of the few democracies in the region, and its future and its stability is incredibly important for the rest of the region, especially as there are increased concerns that Iran and the United States could be on the path to war. Both of these countries have been incredibly important for Iraq, its stability, and also for its politics. So whoever becomes the next leader of this country will have to play the very difficult balancing act of trying to maintain good relations with both the United States and Iran. For Iraqis, this is now a turning point.
Now, Eurovision fans enjoyed plenty of memorable moments at this year's extravaganza of pop. There was a $77,000 dress, chicken impressions and a scary stage invasion during the UK's performance. More on that in a moment, but first let's listen back to some of the highlights, beginning with the winner, Israel, with her distinctly feminist entry.
What's up, Eurovision? 'Cause I'm way up and I ain't going down. You're taking me higher.
Well, the BBC's Paul Henley was watching every moment of the colourful night, and I asked him whether Israel's victory was a surprise or a typical Eurovision choice.
Well, it was one of the favourites, and no, actually, it's not typically Eurovision. In fact, I think the winner this year takes Eurovision to a new, some would say, better place. It's been described as Eurovision's Me Too moment, in fact. Netta from Israel is a woman who was bullied at school, who says she's standing for diversity, for difference. She's larger than any of the other contestants. She's proud, she's out there, she's a feminist. She says, I'm not a Barbie, I've got something to say. And the lyrics of the song say, I'm not your toy, you stupid boy. So although it's an entry that's poking fun at stereotypes and norms, I think it's a fine entry, it's an original entry. She was copying nobody. And it was very funny, actually, to see the 4 female hosts of the competition here in Portugal, who looked, by the way, every one of them, every inch a Barbie doll, hand over the crown to this anti-Barbie figure. It was quite a classic Eurovision moment, I would say, and I think a worthy winner that got votes from the public from all 4 corners of this continent, and also from the professional juries too. It was a clear runaway winner.
All right, it was an entertaining item as well. Well, there was an incident as well with the British entry that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, we're still a bit in the dark as to the motive of the stage intruder who ran on while Suri was performing for the UK, and this is what happened.
We can hold our hands together through the storm, through the storm. Storms.
How did Suri, the British entrant, handle it?
She was the consummate professional. She grabbed the microphone back. She, at one point, fist-pumped the air and carried on with extra vigour. She delivered a great version of the song, actually. It was a slightly lame song, and the UK was never going to do particularly well with it. The fact that the UK didn't come actually bottom of the results board is probably due to the fact that she showed such professionalism on stage. The UK had a disappointing year, another in a long row of disappointing years, but the results this year really disproved that idea that it's all a foregone conclusion, that neighbours vote for neighbours, and that it's clear who the winner's going to be from the start. Look at the songs that scored really well with the public and the jury alike. Austria and Germany were up there in the top 5 because they had quality songs, well written, well performed. There were no automatic votes for Russia this year, who got thrown out in the semi-finals, didn't even feature in the grand final tonight. I think what the results this year proved, that Eurovision is out there and open to anyone with talent and ability and with a fine song, and I think it will actually ensure the survival of the competition for some years to come, tonight's result.
Paul Henley in Lisbon. Soldiers have joined park rangers in the search for 2 British tourists who were kidnapped yesterday in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa. It's thought the pair and their driver were seized by an armed gang while at a gorilla sanctuary at a national park. Richard Lister reports.
The British tourists haven't been named, but are understood to be a man and a woman. They were visiting the Virunga National Park when the vehicle in which they were travelling was attacked by gunmen. Local media say a female ranger with them was killed before the tourists and their driver were abducted. The driver was later released, but there are reports that a ransom has been demanded for the tourists. Virunga is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in eastern Congo, with a large population of mountain gorillas, which attracts tourists from around the world. But armed militias still control large parts of the region, and the Foreign Office advises against almost all travel to eastern Congo. In a statement, it said it was working with the Congolese authorities and supporting the families involved.
Dozens of European Union nationals are suing the British government for damages after being detained and deported for sleeping on the UK's streets, also known as sleeping rough. Figures obtained by the BBC revealed that in the space of a year, almost 700 people were removed under the policy, which has since been ruled unlawful. John Ironmonger reports.
The Home Office under Theresa May began the systematic removal of rough sleepers from Europe 2 years ago. But rough sleepers were being targeted by immigration teams, even if they were in work or had a permanent right of residence in the UK. In December, a judicial review at the High Court found the policy to be illegal and discriminatory. Law firms say at least 45 clients are now seeking damages, while many others who were found on the streets and deported may be entitled to return to the UK. A spokesperson for the government said that it had ceased all action for rough sleeping and claims were being considered on a case-by-case basis.
Well, it's coming up to 4:20 GMT. Just a reminder of the main headlines. Suicide bombers have attacked 3 churches in Indonesia, killing at least 9 people and injuring many more. The French authorities have launched a terrorism investigation after a man stabbed and killed 1 person and injured 4 others in central Paris. And President Trump has thanked North Korea after it confirmed it would dismantle its nuclear test site within 2 weeks. BBC World Service. President Trump has said thank you in response to North Korea's announcement that it would begin to dismantle its nuclear test site. In a tweet, Mr. Trump described it as a very smart and gracious gesture. Earlier, Pyongyang had said foreign journalists would be invited to watch the event. According to the state news agency, the nuclear complex in a remote mountain location in the north of the country will be shut later this month, 3 weeks before President Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un meet in Singapore. From the South Korean capital Seoul, our correspondent Laura Bicker.
Another key public announcement from the usually secretive state. She's describing a ceremony to dismantle North Korea's main nuclear test site. Kim Jong-un has carried out all 6 nuclear blasts within the secluded mountain valleys of Punggye, but now he says he'll blow up all the tunnels and block all entrances and allow foreign media to watch. It's the kind of serious step the US has been hoping for. Earlier this week, the Secretary of State travelled to Pyongyang. He had an offer to help build the state's economy if they gave up their weapons. Back in Washington, in a meeting with the South Korean Foreign Minister, Mr. Pompeo made it clear sanctions will remain until any deal is done.
It will require a robust verification program, and one that that we will undertake with partners around the world.
It's been a week of dizzying diplomatic efforts, with the release of 3 men who were held in North Korea for over a year. Skeptics say President Trump is falling for the Pyongyang playbook. But others believe there's a chance that North Korea's priorities are changing and that just perhaps this time might be different.
Now, is Sweden doing the right thing by embracing a cashless economy? In recent years, the Technophile country's been leading the race towards becoming the first completely cash-free nation. This is thanks to a boom in mobile and online payments, as well as a rapid rise in the number of shops and local bank branches refusing to handle cash. Maddie Savage has been meeting Swedes with different views on the subject.
My name is Maj-Lis Jonsson, and I'm 73 years old.
Her local bank branch no longer handles cash or cheques, and it charges for over-the-counter transfers. So it's just cost her 75 krona, around $9, to pay back a friend who booked a train trip.
The banks, they are so rich. Of course, they always say you can do it for free at internet, but it's a problem. We are some that don't know how to do it. Now I'm going for a cup of coffee. I think I need it and I'm worth it after this.
In general, Swedes are actually among the most tech-savvy retirees in Europe. 70% of 65 to 74-year-olds bank online, compared to an EU average of 26%. But the Swedish National Pensioners Organisation says that means people like Maj-Lis can end up feeling even more excluded.
If you want to pay with cash on a bus, it's not possible. You need a smartphone to enter a public toilet.
That's Ola Nilsson, a spokesperson for the group.
My name is Victor Schuberg and I'm an advisor at SEB, one of the biggest banks in Sweden.
How many of your branches still handle cash?
That's going to be 7 out of our 118 branches. The reason for that is customer demand, really.
Welcome to Stockholm School of Economics. My name's Claire Ingram-Bogush. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. I would say most Swedes have adapted to the cashless society without even thinking about it. New apps or something that they just build into their everyday life. Swedes are very trusting, but I think that is changing. The recent Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example, has made people more aware of how their data is being used.
How long do you think it will be until Sweden becomes completely cashless?
Not long. Less than 5 years and we'd be overwhelmingly cashless.
Maj-Lis Jonsson is sipping on a milky coffee at a busy cafe, which, you've guessed it, no longer takes cash.
You have that feeling that the society is not for you.
My name is Johan. I'm a part-time student and part-time worker. Me personally, I love it. I think that cash are out of date, not really necessary.
My name's Agatha. I don't see that it's good if we're going to be entirely cashless, because I think there should always be an option to use cash in case of scenarios where, like, the internet doesn't work.
Nationwide polls suggest that even though most Swedes prefer using cards and mobile payments, around 7 in 10 still want notes and coins to stick around in future. The Nordic nation may have developed a reputation as one of the most innovative places on the planet, but it seems locals are also clinging on to a more traditional Swedish trait: caution.
Maddie Savage there. Now Rosemary has some other stories from our news desk.
Exit polls in the southern Indian state of Karnataka suggest that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party is expected to win the most seats, but fall short of a majority. The opposition Congress Party, which controlled the state until Saturday's election, is in second place. The vote is being treated as an indicator ahead of national elections next year. Officials in the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo say they have identified the remains of 10-year-old twins in the rubble of a high-rise building which collapsed after it caught fire over 10 days ago. The officials said the boys, Wenda and Welder, had been squatting in the building with their mother, along with around 50 families. The maverick filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard has lived up to his reputation by attending a news conference at Cannes via FaceTime. The 87-year-old fielded questions about his latest film from his home in Switzerland, having opted not to travel to the south of France. Reporters took turns to stand in front of a mobile phone held by his producer and cinematographer Fabrice Aragno.
Thanks, Rosemary. You might have heard of the concept of the Napoleon complex or short man syndrome. It's a widely held belief that short men can be more aggressive to make up for their height. But is there actually any evidence to support the theory? At 1 metre and 69 centimetres tall, Napoleon Bonaparte was average for his time and taller than the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi or the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. Here's the Newsroom's Shivani Davi.
The theory, otherwise known as the Napoleon complex, suggests men act more aggressively to compensate for their lack of height. For over a century, psychologists have been debating this phenomenon. But a team from the Netherlands has put together a test to work out if the cliché is true. Researchers asked men to stand head-to-head, tall versus short, in a dictator game. One man would decide how much money each of them got. Then they compared the result with a similar scenario, but in this situation, one man would make an offer and the other could choose to accept or reject the money. Lead researcher on the study, Jill Knapen, told us what happened.
What we found was that short men tended to keep more money, but only when they were in a position of full power. So only if the taller men could not reject their offer, and then they would both end up with nothing. The taller men did not do that. And we think that is because short men have to have a more flexible strategy in order to gather those resources, because they don't have the same opportunities as the taller men do. So when they do have the opportunities, then they can switch their strategies in order to get more of the resources out of the competition. If you look at the big picture, then you see that these men actually use height cues in their social environment, at least unconsciously. They then use this information to actually change their behaviors or change their strategies.
But not everyone's quite so convinced. Mike Essler at the University of Central Lancashire said the findings don't support the idea of short man syndrome, because to truly express the Napoleon complex, they're supposed to be publicly advertising their aggressiveness rather than in private. As a short person myself, I'm pretty glad the science is still out.
You've been listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Regid Ahmed. Now, you can get all of our podcasts and live news programmes on our website, including many editions of the Newsroom. Just go to bbcworldservice.com for all of that. And, of course, on the website, bbc.com/news.